To help us understand the true power of the mind, please welcome science journalist and broadcaster, the recently appointed Director of the Royal Institution of Australia, which, by the way, seeks to highlight the importance of science in everyday life. He will be joined by Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, Professor Lorimer Moseley, Craig Hassett, and Tony Bazan. Could you welcome them, please?
We were actually instructed to do that little pirouette. Did you like that? It's a great way to start the performance with a little choreography. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me along today. As I was introduced, Paul Willis, Director of the Royal Institution of Australia. We are a specialist unit for engaging Australians with science. Some of you may recognise me from Catalyst, ABC TV. Hands up. So there are viewers. The right ratings are lying to us. No, something that I would actually like to ask these guys, because I know how the mind works. It's amazing how many people have said to me of late, "Oh, I recognise the voice. I've been on television for 10 years and they recognise the voice." I don't know how that works. I'll briefly introduce my panel, but we've seen them all today. Can we get a big round of applause, please, for Jeffrey, Lorimer and Tony? We do have an unfortunate late scratching in Bajinda. That's unfortunate, but I'm sure we've got more than enough brain power here to get us through this session. And what do we want to discuss? Well, the science of neuroplasticity is relatively young. And it's only been 10 years or so that we've gone from thinking the brain is a static organ that is prone to degeneration and can't be mended, through to some remarkable feats of showing how it can be rearranged and reinvigorated to perform new functions or to perform old functions in new ways. A really invigorating area of science. And it raises the question, what are the limits of that potential? How much can we actually expect to get out of the mind? And probably to start us off, Jeffrey, from your talk this morning, it would seem that the potential of the mind is almost completely limitless, but that would be false, wouldn't it?
I think false would be an overstatement, but I do think there's a place for humility, and I think it came through very, very well in the clinical session, where the therapist very cogently made the point that, especially if you're dealing with significant illness, and most of what I have done professionally has been dealing with a very significant illness as well, obsessive compulsive disorder, and now, yes, in this new book, you know, I've spent considerable thought and also worked with a very excellent co-author who was a student of mine who I knew since she was an undergraduate, and this is actually maybe a good way to enter into the answer. And then I actually wrote her primary recommendation letter for medical school, and she went on to become a psychiatrist, and 2 years ago completed as chief resident in psychiatry at University of California, Los Angeles, and then we got to write a book together. And she doesn't mind me saying this. When I met her as an undergraduate, sometimes the way I say this is just say, let's just say she was very, 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 very interested in obsessive compulsive disorder. And she got in touch with me and expressed that interest, asked if she could come and study with me, which she did. And she was an honors student as an undergraduate. But she wasn't sure she was going to be able to do what it would take to get into medical school. In the end, she got into University of California, San Francisco is one of the absolutely most prestigious medical schools, not only in the US, but in the world. So it's not like you have these expectations where you go, okay, you can do anything. I mean, on one level, I might implicitly sort of think that way myself internally, but it's true. You don't want to communicate to a sufferer who's under acute duress, you can do anything. I mean, I thought it was very well laid out in the clinical session we just had, that you deal with what's in front of you. But the thing that's really changed, and I had the opportunity in Beijing a couple of weeks ago to speak to neurologists at a very prestigious world meeting, and I was talking in a session on stroke. And so on the one hand, I have my own student, who's now my co-author, who at the time when I met her and she learned about these 4 steps, wasn't sure she could make it to sort of the next level of education, and learning these 4 steps enabled her, and now she's, a lot of the way the book is written is from her inner perspective. And analogously to that, when I was addressing these were all world-class neurologists at this meeting in Beijing, and at a session on stroke, and I'm a psychiatrist, pointed out to them that, which is the non-controversial fact, to put a concrete answer on the point that you're making. 15 years ago, if a person came in after a stroke with what's called hemiplegia, which is essentially paralysis of a limb, all of the physical therapy, all of it, was directed towards using the other limb, because it was the dogma, and it was dogma, that once the brain area has died, is now necrotic, which is just the medical word for dead, you have dead brain tissue that no longer is there to control one of your arms or legs, or both. All of the therapy was directed towards using what remained, because the dogma said that was all you had. That was 15 years ago and 10 years ago. I mean, this is not a long time ago. The entire ideology of that, the entire theoretical frame of that has completely changed, and now it's well known, and chapter 2 of You Are Not Your Brain is about this, and the theoretical underpinnings of it in my book, The Mind and the Brain, are presented in more detail, that now the therapy is that if the person makes the effort to move the affected limb, you can take brain areas that are adjacent to the area that is no longer functioning and rewire it so that the limb that could not move now can move, and this is not controversial anymore. So look at what has happened. The belief that you can't move it meant no one moved it, because no one made the concerted effort that it took to get it to move. The belief that you just have too many things running around your head for you to get into medical school, you believe that, you're not going to get into medical school. So these things become negative, self-fulfilling prophecies, and so who are we to set the limits? But the answer when you're dealing with the sufferer in front of you is, let's take it step by step, and not overwhelm people with the notion of possibility, but in ourselves believe, for all intents and purposes, it is limitless.
We've just seen a wonderful example of what can be achieved through this sort of approach in the last session with Johnny Faversham. It was quite moving, and if that had occurred 10 years earlier, it would have been a completely different outcome. Lorimer, moving on to the whole question of pain, and realizing that the perception of pain is a large part of what's experienced as pain. Is there a limit as to how far you can take that? Because obviously there's a stimulus there that's doing something. How far can you go towards just ignoring that?
Yeah, great question. I'd like to respond to one part of that, and I think the perception of pain is actually the entirety of pain. It is the perception. And that's where the distinction between what's going on outside of consciousness and pain should be made. How far can you take it? I think I have a contrary view, I think, to yours, Jeff, that I think that there are real limits on these things. As far as how we can take it, the experiments that we can do a lot to trick people, so the things that should really hurt don't hurt, and things that shouldn't hurt, and we have to provide very compelling evidence to convince the brain of that. But there are examples where how far can the system be taken, and I would say that's almost limitless from a pain perspective, that we know that you can have your legs completely blown off and it doesn't hurt. And we know that people can, we do experiments where we convince people that a rubber
How did you get that experiment through the ethics committee?
Yeah, we are always looking for subjects for that. We do experiments where we convince someone that a rubber arm is their arm and, instead of their own arm, and we can apply stimuli to the rubber arm that evokes severe pain in a rubber arm without touching their real arm. That seems limitless. Like, you can almost feel pain in someone else. We do illusions where you wear a camera on your forehead and you have a set of goggles. Someone wears a camera and you have the set of goggles and you're seeing what's coming into their eyeball, and you shake hands with that person and you have the illusion that you're outside of your own body. And when we do that, we can run a knife off what looks like someone else's arm, and you feel the pain, but you feel it on their arm. So there are really remarkable distortions that happen.
So where is our disagreement, Lorimer? I haven't heard it yet.
Yeah, well, I'm getting there. It's a great point. So
I'm just going to have a cup of tea. Yeah.
I think of the patient. I think there are, maybe the limit is more put in there by time. We don't have long enough in some patients, and I think I certainly in the last session with John, Julia really floated this option of, so are we giving people false hope? And I don't think we are, but I think the thing that I'd really like to pick up on, that I really concur with, is that we can always do more. And this caters for this thing. Look, I say to patients, don't think about being 100% better and do the marathon, because invariably they won't come back, because they just can't see that. But I say, do 5 seconds more on this tomorrow. And they can do that. So I wonder if the limit is actually the speed at which we can change these things.
Yeah, well,
And we all die, most of us.
right.
Yeah, speak for yourself. Tony, from your experience, how universal is the ability to change the way we think? Because on one hand, it would seem like these are techniques that anyone should be able to use. But I can imagine that there are certain people, certain sectors of society who would actually be resistant to changing their minds.
If a person is resistant to changing their mind, they're thinking, I won't change my mind. And if they're thinking, I won't change my mind, they're changing their mind to become more non-change.
So the stasis is the change.
Yeah. So we have no choice but to change. We are creatures of change. And in my experience, I have never found anyone who couldn't change. And I mean, if I give you just one example, and we could ask the audience to participate, on memory. In 1993, psychologists at London University had done experiments to see what are the limits of memory. And they found limits. And one of the limits they found was that no one could memorize a spoken number of 30 digits in length or more if they were only allowed to hear it, not to write it down, and it just carried on going until 30 digits. They said no one will ever be able to do this. In other words, this is an absolute limit. And just to give you a feeling for what that means, if I just give you the experiment. So you are the London University students. I am giving you the experiment. You have to remember the numbers I am saying. First number is 3, 5. How many of you can remember that?
Notice that we three couldn't.
Exactly.
That was 2 digits, and it was laughably easy. Laughably easy. You all laughed. Eliminate that. Next number. 5, 9, 0, 1, 6. Okay, that's that number. How many can remember that? Okay, 5 digits. Easy or difficult? Yeah, people say easy-ish. Next number, eliminate the previous ones. 7, 3, 0, 1, 2, 8, 9. How many can remember that? Okay, easy or difficult? Yeah, difficult-ish. That was 7 digits, which is where most brains begin to fracture. Now, are these getting more difficult on a straight line difficulty or exponential? Exponential. So now you realize why the psychologist said no one is ever going to get to 30. It's millions of times more difficult, as you are about to discover. Eliminate the others and really focus on this next number. 6, 4, 4, 9, 0, 1, 6, 2, 8, 4, 7, 5, 9, 8. How many can remember that number? That was 14 digits only, and by the time I got to 10, many of you were laughing. 2 laughably easy, 10 laughably difficult.
Can you recite that string for us?
Yeah, I can.
Go on.
That's because I made it up. You can test me after, Phil. So that's why they said no one would ever get to 30. In the World Memory Championships last year, three competitors memorized a spoken number, spoken twice as fast as I just spoke those to you, of 100 digits long. And the man who won the competition, and you'll be pleased to know he was 45 years old, the oldest competitor, memorized the number 202 digits long, perfectly. And that was in the morning. He had other memory competitions, and they had a celebration champagne cocktail. He had 5 glasses of champagne, then dinner, and then some mean interrogator said, "Gunther, can you still remember that number?" And to everyone's amazement, he did. Again. 10 hours, 5 more competitions, 5 glasses of champagne, a meal, and he still remembered it. When he finished, he said, "Would you like me to do it again?" Backwards.
It's the champagne.
And he did. And he did. And he said that he'd only been training his memory for about 8 years, and that he saw, to use the increasingly common word, no limits. He could just go on and on. Once he had the methodology, once he knew how to manage his own mind. So I don't see any limits. Every time I see a limit, or somebody putting on a limit to the brain, some brain on the planet says, "Who says?" And jumps over that
There's an
barrier.
American footballer, to put it in sort of the, in the sense of belief. I mean, I'm sure the analogous or even identical statement has been made by Australian and British footballers, etc. And his quote was, near the end of his career, "I've never lost a game. There were times when the clock ran out, when we were behind." And that's maybe a good way to think about it.
It's interesting you refer to your mathematical guy as 8 years of training. These exercises, as with any physical exercise, it's use it or lose it principle.
Yeah.
Does that apply for exercises for the brain?
Of course. I mean,
Definitely.
the original survey on the decline in creativity, the decline in memory. Why do we decline in creativity normally when naturally we shouldn't? Because we are trained not to daydream. We are trained not to use colors. We are trained not to play the fool. We are trained not to move when we're learning. We're trained not to explore with our senses. Listen to the litany that assaults the young brain. You've got this fabulous little brain that wants to do everything. And when a little child at the age of 2 kind of tottering around and starts to look at people, what do we say to it? Don't stare. That's rude.
I say, what are you looking at?
That's an isosceles.
Yeah. So what we're saying is don't use your 260 million light receivers to take in that fascinating original face. And then it wants to touch. What do we say? Don't touch. And then it wants to play with its food. What do we say? Don't play with your food. Don't touch. Don't look. Don't move. Don't sing. Don't daydream. And when the poor little wretch is 15 years old and totally depressed, we say, what's the matter with you?
But it has to be done in a regulated way, or the time will run out too early on that person.
Jeffrey, as a psychiatrist, are there limits on neuroplasticity, on training the brain when it comes to certain neurological disorders? And is there the risk of giving false hope?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is a risk, but I mean, I think that we've actually covered that. I said it in the original statement. Lorimer said he disagreed, but we'll leave for another time trying to psychodynamically understand why he didn't just say he agreed, because he did.
See how easily your minds were manipulated?
Because the issue is, and it happened, so well with John. I mean, and is if it is done in a stepwise fashion, it's the person who is trying to work with someone who sees themselves as limited. I mean, you don't want a person to feel overwhelmed or it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, you do not want to inculcate into a person's mind the feeling, I can't do that. What you want to do is inculcate them with the sense of, I can do that. And if you're going to inculcate them with the sense that they can do that, and it needs to be, there need to be behaviors. I mean, that's why when I say refocus on a behavior, so on things that you can do.
Hang on. I want to persecute this one a bit. But what about a condition, say, schizophrenia? I mean, there is a deep problem there in the funcking of the brain.
Yes, there is.
Can that be addressed through these sorts of...
Here's the thing I say to people who have obsessive-compulsive disorder, which at its severe end can be as disabling as clinically significant schizophrenia. People always frequently want to know, am I going to be cured? And this becomes particularly relevant to the answer for the question on schizophrenia. I mean, not that I thought it was a great movie in terms of clinical portrayal, but it is what the movie A Beautiful Mind was about. No time to discuss the limits, but the principle was nice. And in terms of real life, when people with obsessive-compulsive disorder, which is a serious neuropsychiatric, genetically inherited condition in which people get very, very troubling, intrusive thoughts and urges in their mind, and then they come in and they say, can this be cured? And I say to them, it depends on what you mean by cured. If what you mean is, can I get to the point where my functioning is close to or essentially non-discernible from someone who has no diagnosis at all, if that's what you mean by cure, the answer is pretty close to yes. But if what you mean by that is I'm never going to have these intrusive, bothersome urges come in my mind again, and they're never going to be more intense than a person who has no diagnosis of this kind, then I say, no, we probably can't do that, or we may not be able to do that. And this gets into the issue of adaptability and defining cure in functional terms. I mean, part of the problem we have in medical culture is that people are looking for magic bullets where they don't have to do anything that is going to just make it all go away. That is a real limit on self-directed neuroplasticity. What you want is thank you. I mean, and especially when it leads to high doses of drugs and other physical manipulations of the brain, which are dangerous and our medical culture is not careful enough about. So what we want to do is set things out so that people see achievable goals and define where we're going in functional terms, not in terms of it's all going to go away, you're never going to feel a feeling you don't want to have again. That's spiritually a problem. Just the other day, we were talking about using yoga to treat Parkinson's disease, and a physician said to me, well, the problem there is that you have to keep doing it. And I responded by saying, that's not a problem, that's a good thing. It's a good thing that you have to keep doing it. Where is this notion that a good treatment means you just do it and you don't have to do it anymore? This shows the medical biases that our culture has. That has to change.
John, you were Tony, you were champing at the bit there.
Yeah. I wanted to agree with Jeff on the horror and the danger of putting a limit on any person's, especially child's, brain. And I experienced that myself in art. My first drawing was of a little boat, and I got totally involved at the age of 5 in shading in the gray, because my particular pencil at that time had a very soft, beautiful gray lead. And I was told that that was not a proper boat and that I was no good in art, and I believed it. And so from that moment on, art was cauterized, cut out. And as everything connects to everything else, the minute you start to cut things out, you've got a cancer going into your conceptual universe that eats everything. And so because I thought I could not draw, I never tried it. I never made images in my notes. I looked at artists and art and thought, oh, God, what an amazing thing. What different kind of brains these magical people have. Not like mine, which is incapable. So the minute you say to a child, you are not an artist, you are not a poet, you are not a scientist, you are starting to kill them. And for people to put their hands up and say, I'm not a scientist, when all that a scientist is a kid who's got a hypothesis, an idea, and sees what happens. Watch little children with stones around a pond or a puddle. What do? Chuck one in, a small one. And then what do? Chuck in the next one. So every second of our lives is an experiment. You are experimenting now. You think that you can get out of the seat that you're in. It's an hypothesis. And you've got to go through the experimental method.
I wish I knew more scientists who thought like that, Tony. Yeah. I know plenty who don't think like that.
Well, then they're not real scientists.
Well, they get paid like they are.
Yeah, but
I don't know if that's a good thing.
Lorimer, you wanted to
go on.
in here. I'd be intrigued to know who the control group is of not wanting to stand up out of their seat. But anyway.
Yeah. At fear of thinking that I agree with something when I don't, I'd like to sort of have the courage to talk anyway. I completely concur with this idea of not putting limits on, but I also have so many experiences of in a clinical sense, of patients hearing when we say, look, you could be just like that person if you try harder or something like that, and them hearing, well, I'm crap.
Yeah.
Because I can't do that.
That's a cognitive distortion.
So the conclusion is not something that's put on from externally. It's something that's embraced because one is not sympathetic to the resources available to this person and the context at this time. And I think it would be a mistake for us to not be able to jump over and sit in their shoes and say, righto, well, where am I working from? I don't have the incredible intellect or creativity of these people. Possibly, or maybe they do, but they certainly don't feel like they do.
We have to help them realize that they
small, achievable goals.
Sure. Yeah. But I think that's
with
a key.
Small, achievable goals, it is limitless.
And sensitivity.
But I could imagine in your clinic dealing with people with severe chronic pain that they've had for a long time, that delivering the message that you can modify that feeling by various exercises, if that's not delivered the right way, would actually work against it.
Yeah,
it would
this
seem
is what
insurmountable.
Happens. I'll tell you what happens. It's this.
That's true.
So you're saying it's all in my head. And the subtext of that is, fuck off. It really is. And it is a skill that should not be underestimated, that you can somehow reconceptualise that. And I encourage us all to try it, but try it with effectively, try it with love.
Try not to get to obscene epithets with the people you're working with. There's a take-home message.
This is Australia, it's allowed.
and in response to that, that is the language of someone in pain at times.
No, of course it is.
And we cannot connect without connecting.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does indeed. And I'd like to sit here and keep connecting because this is a fascinating discussion. But we've come to the limit of our time here.
No, there's no limits.
There's no limits.
No, you said that time was a limit. What a fantastic discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a big round of applause. Jeffrey, Lorimer, Tony.
Thank you.